So Amy was saying that this is a graphical representation of design thinking. And Rick just texts and says, Amy, you cannot be more wrong. And you know what? I kind of agree with Rick. And I'm going to tell you why, even though this is a 5-step problem solving methodology, I would call it, this is not quite design thinking. And I'm going to explain to you why. First of all, I just want to say that on the title, it doesn't say design thinking at all. So the people who drew this diagram, they did not say this is design thinking, okay? And since Amy brought it up and says this is design thinking, and we disagree. First off, you can see they also have 5 different steps, and the names are kind of different, right? They start with define, brainstorm, pick, implement, and review, and just kind of go off the loop like this. So the first thing I would say is they start off with define. If you guys remember, design thinking always starts with empathy. And if you are doing a methodology in problem solving or innovation and you never start with empathy, I would say it's not design thinking. As a matter of fact, empathy is arguably one of the most distinctive features of applying design thinking, is that you start with empathy. And they start with define, because defining could mean a lot of different things. You could define the problem just by your own observation, or just by doing some data analysis, or a wild guess, right? Or from your experience. Some people say I have been working in this field for X number of years or decades. This is what I know. So immediately they jump to, okay, this is the problem. This is how I define it, without even talking to the users or customers or stakeholders. So I would argue, if you don't use empathy, it's hardly design thinking. Design thinking, we have a step called ideation. And instead of ideation, they say brainstorm over here. Are they the same thing? I would also argue that even though in ideation you brainstorm, but that's not all of it, right? Brainstorming could be brainstorming code. You have no data, you have no insights, you have no analysis, and you just come into a room with random people and you come up with random ideas. In ideation, in design thinking, we don't do random ideas. Even though it may seem random, and we always encourage people to think outside the box, so to speak, but we ideate based on our findings, based on our observations, our insights, what we learn from the previous step, starting from empathy, and then we define. And when we ideate, we always look back to those findings from the last step and the first 2 steps. So brainstorm by itself, it could be doing that from actual findings and insights, but it doesn't say so. So I would say, just brainstorming by itself, a little bit different from ideation. And then they have pick and implement, and instead of testing, they say review. Maybe, a different wording. Testing implies more of an interaction between your product and service with the end user. So the feedback is actually from the actual users. Review could be internal, it could be external. In that case, I would also say it's not exactly what we had in mind when we were saying prototyping and testing in design thinking. The biggest problem that I have with this graph is It's not really design thinking because you can see it's an open loop, right? It goes sideways. It doesn't tell you to go back to the first step because they did not start with empathy. So what I'm saying is it's in design thinking. We did our prototyping and testing. We actually would do a closed loop. A closed loop means you going back when you get the feedback from the users, when you have new findings, you go back to applying empathy again. Try to understand what all this means. And then you define ways that you can improve on your next iteration, and you ideate and you prototype and you test again. It's almost like a never ending closed loop, right? Imagine you're working on the iPhone, for example, in Apple. This is exactly what they do. They do a closed loop, right? Every year, when they release newer model of the iPhone, they find new features to impress the users. And where do they get the ideas? They get the ideas from the previous year, the feedback from the users, not just reviewing them internally. They get actual people using the apps and the interface or the phone, the physical form itself, and they have different kinds of feedbacks. What's working, what's not working, what can be improved. And that's empathy. And they go back and then iterate and then go use that new features in the next version of the iPhone. So because of these reasons, I would argue that Rick, I agree with you. Amy, it's not quite right for using this graph as a representation of design thinking. It's a 5-step problem solving model. And I'm not saying that whoever did this is wrong. I'm just saying that just be careful when you see graphs like this online. You see 5 steps, and on design thinking, we have a lot of graphs that also saying 5 steps, and then you put the two and two together and thinking this is design thinking. And as a matter of fact, it may not be.